Look, I'm just going to say it right now. The Dallas Cowboys are calling the Raiders about Maxx Crosby, and if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about where this organization is right now, I don't know what will. But before I get into that whole mess, we need to talk about what's really going on with this team because I think a lot of us, me included, have been fooling ourselves about what this season was supposed to be. What's up, Raiders Nation? Welcome to the NFL Playbook, Raiders. So here's the thing. We're 2-5. We're bad. That's not a hot take. That's just reality. And I've been thinking a lot about this, especially after that embarrassing loss to the Chiefs. 31-0, less than 100 total yards, 29 total plays, 3 first downs. That's bullshit. And I think what really hits me is that we as fans tend to put players on a higher pedestal than they probably deserve. We make these projections before the season starts based on what we hope is going to happen, not necessarily what's realistic. I was sitting there before the season thinking about what Geno Smith did in the past, thinking about what the rookies were going to do, thinking Jacoby Myers was going to take another leap, thinking Brock Bowers is going to be healthy and do his thing. We talked about Darian Porter, we talked about Dante Thornton, and we talked about all these young guys who were going to make an impact. And sure, sometimes you get surprised by a rookie who exceeds expectations, like what the Bucs got with their guy. But for us, it just hasn't worked out that way.
When I think about the truly great teams in the NFL right now, or even just the good teams, it's pretty obvious what separates them from us. Take the Detroit Lions. You start naming their players and your brain just fills up with talent. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jared Goff, Penei Sewell, Jahmyr Gibbs, Aiden Hutchinson, Jameson Williams, and Dan Campbell's an elite coach on top of all that. The Eagles have Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Cooper DeJean, Zach Bound, and so many others. The Chiefs have Mahomes, Kelsey, Worthy, Rice, McDuffie, Chris Jones. You can do this with any winning team. The Packers, any team that's winning a lot of games. Now, do that exercise with the Raiders. Maxx Crosby? Brock Bowers? That's it. And we've got some other guys who are playing fine, but that's basically it. You could throw Colt Miller in there too, but he gets hurt a lot. And right now, our coaching staff, as it's currently put together, is just not in a position to make up for what is simply not a good enough roster. That's the bottom line. Here's where the real problem comes in, though. If Pete Carroll and John Spytek had framed the season from the beginning as a developmental year, if they'd said, we're going to try to win, but our main focus is setting ourselves up for the future, developing young guys, finding the quarterback of the future, and the next year's when we're really going to compete, I don't think we'd be as frustrated. We all kind of said that anyway, right? We said this year would have ups and downs. Next year would be the year when it's Jonty's second year or Brock's third year when we've drafted another guy, when everything comes together.
But that's not what happened. Pete Carroll being as old as he is, John Spytek going out and trading for Geno Smith, that led us to believe they were trying to win now. Drafting Gene Potty at 6 led us to believe they were trying to win now. And then when you see a performance like that Chiefs game, it looks a lot more like a rebuild than we were initially led to believe. I think when you really look at it, it all comes down to Spytek and Pete Carroll rolling the dice on Geno Smith. At the time, it seemed like a safe bet. I mean, we could have had Sam Darnold, Daniel Jones, Mac Jones, any one of these veteran quarterbacks, and honestly, it probably would have worked out better than what Geno has given us. Unfortunately, we got the one that went into complete pumpkin mode. And this is where things get really interesting because now we're hearing that the Cowboys are making inquiries about trading for Maxx Crosby. Trey Wingo put it out there and it's got everyone talking. If the Cowboys are reaching out about Maxx, does that mean the Raiders are actually considering moving him? And look, I get why people are freaking out about this. Maxx Crosby is our guy. He's the heart and soul of this defense. But here's what I think is really happening behind the scenes. Mark Davis is frustrated. We know that from reports. He talked to some people at an owners meeting and he made it clear he's not happy with where things are at. But he also said he's not firing anyone. Pete Carroll isn't getting fired. John Spytek isn't getting fired. But I think what's happening is that the front office is starting to realize that this rebuild is going to take longer than they initially thought. Maybe they didn't fully understand the timeline of how long it was going to take to build a real contender. And now some people are saying the Raiders could look at doing a full teardown, trading guys like Maxx to accumulate as many assets as possible, maybe getting 3 first-round picks, trading guys like Tyree Wilson or Malcolm Kuntz or JPJ or whoever might have value.
The thing is, from a salary cap perspective, trading Maxx isn't actually as bad as you'd think. The team that acquires him would get him at pretty reasonable cap hits. $20 million this year, $30 million next year, and then 3 more years under $30 million. When you consider guys like Myles Garrett are making over $40 million,
That's actually a really good deal. And for the Raiders to get out of it, it's only $18 million in dead cap this year and $5 million next year. So financially, it could work. But here's my issue with all of this. Just because the Cowboys are calling doesn't mean the Raiders are shopping Maxx. Those are two completely different things. Teams call about players all the time. That doesn't mean the team is ready to move that player. And honestly, it wouldn't make sense for the Raiders to trade Maxx at this point. If you trade him, you're just going to be looking for another Maxx Crosby in the draft. You already have him. Why would you give that up? I know people are going to say, well, you get 3 first-round picks and you can rebuild faster, but how often do those picks actually turn into Maxx Crosby? He's a proven elite player who's still young enough to be part of the solution when this team finally turns it around. And speaking of guys who might not be part of the solution, we need to talk about Jakobi Meyers. He spoke recently, or at least someone spoke to him, and he reiterated that he still wants to be traded. He said he hasn't talked to the team about it since before the season started. And then he said something that really stood out to me. When asked if he'd still like a new deal with the Raiders, he said, "I honestly haven't thought too much about it. The window kind of just closed with the offseason ending. If it gets done, I don't care for real. I just really want to be in a good spot for me and my family."
To me, that tells you everything. Jakobi Meyers doesn't want to be here anymore. He's checked out. I'm not saying he's not a good teammate or that he's not going to show up when he's healthy, but mentally, he's done with the Raiders. And I think John Spytek fumbled this whole situation. When Jakobi first asked for a contract extension, the Raiders should have either paid him or traded him immediately. They shouldn't have let it become public. Once it became public, his trade value tanked because other teams know he doesn't want to be in Las Vegas. Why would they give up a second or third round pick for a guy they can potentially sign in free agency after this season? I don't think Jakobi plays for the Raiders again. I know he practiced in full recently, but I think that's just optics. I think he's decided he's sitting out until he gets traded, and the Raiders are playing along with the whole injury situation. The problem is, Spytek probably isn't getting the offers he wants. At this point, the best offer might be something like a 6th-round pick, and that's not good value for a talented young receiver. This is where everything connects back to the bigger picture. If you're going to commit to a rebuild, if you're going to accept that this team is a few years away from competing, then you have to make hard decisions. You have to decide who's part of the future and who isn't. Maxx Crosby should absolutely be part of the future. Brock Bowers obviously is. Aston Genty, we're still figuring that out. But guys like Jakobi, if he doesn't want to be here, move him for whatever you can get. Don't let it drag out and become a distraction. The real question is whether Pete Carroll and John Spytek are on the same page about what this rebuild looks like. I think Spytek sees the writing on the wall. He knows this team is a few years away. That's why he didn't spend big money to retain all the defensive free agents. That's why he brought in guys like Devin White and Jeremy Chin for cheaper. He's saving money for next year and beyond. But I think Pete Carroll came in with the mindset of, we're going to get Geno and do what I do, and that created a disconnect. If you put a lie detector on Spytek, I think he'd tell you he always thought this team was a couple years away.